All right, how are we doing today? Today we're going to cover the Middle Ages and kind of give you a little introduction to it. Now, I did introduce it last class. We talked about what happens if society were to collapse in our age today, and then also what really happened for the Europeans back then. Okay, so some things to keep in mind. Okay, this is a pretty crazy time. We're going to see the rise of kings and queens all over Europe, and you can even look for the painting to the right. Okay, it was a pretty miserable, scary time overall for the majority of people. And it was reflected a lot in the artwork. A lot of the artwork's going to be religiously based as well. Okay. So, the big question we're going to look at to answer is how did Europe change after the fall of the Roman Empire? Roman Empire had complete control over Europe for a period of time. Now, they did go through a long, slow decline, but still, most people were connected by being a part of the empire and they followed Roman law. They had the Roman army, they had the Roman they used the currency, all that stuff. So it's going to completely change the way they live, kind of like how we talked about in class yesterday. If our government collapsed, how would it affect us? So what and when? Okay, this period is going to be known by a lot of names. Okay, I might call it Middle Ages, medieval period, the Dark Ages. These are all names that people use this. Okay, the one name I want to point out, and we have talked about this previously, is Dark Ages. Okay, so why is it called the Dark Ages? So the first thing is understand, you know, view Rome as kind of being a light of the world with all their technology, their knowledge, their information, and the period after this is also like it's called the Renaissance, which means a rebirth. So it's like a rebirth of that knowledge. So in between, they call it this dark period. Okay. Um, but it's not dark because they weren't intelligent or anything. It's just during this time period there was war, there was death everywhere. Okay, and the number one goal for everyone's going to be survival. So, the carrying on of knowledge and learning and gathering further information just isn't going to be at the forefront. Okay. So the dark ages is the idea of, just trying to kind of explain it wasn't a time where humans were necessarily moving forward because they were dealing with a lot of other factors. Okay. So when did this happen? This time period is going to happen between the fall of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Renaissance in Europe. And that's from about 500 to 1500. Remember when you see C, it means circa, meaning about, okay, 500 to 1500. So that's about 1,000 years this time period is going to last for. Now, we're going to talk about the early Middle Ages right now, mainly, okay? We're not going to do this all at once. Um, Now, the collapse of the Roman Empire. Okay, the Roman Empire had faced a long, slow decline. Some of the reasons you might remember is okay, they went through the crisis of their century. They went through multiple emperors being murdered, emperors being overthrown by their own guards. Okay, um, they had the economy kind of went in ruins. They were getting invaded by other people. They started relying on basically mercenaries to fight who weren't loyal to them. All sorts of different reasons for why they declined. Okay, but eventually, what happens is on September 4th, 476, Rome is sacked for the final time, and the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, is actually overthrown. Now, when we say sacked, that means basically this barbarian and the king, Otis there, came in and basically they burned down the city, destroyed everything, and pretty much stole and looted. Okay, that's a picture of the king right down there on the left, and on the right is a picture of pretty much stuff supposed to be stolen. Okay, good. So when we look at what are the immediate effect, okay, of the collapse of the Roman Empire, okay, this little chart, and I need you guys to fill this out on your outline as well. Okay, so the Roman Empire collapsed. It's important to remember with its army. Okay, that happens too. Now people are no longer safe. They can no longer perform their jobs or live their life and just depend on the Roman Empire and its army to protect them. So now they have to look after themselves. What's going to happen is a lot of people leave the cities because of this, and they have to farm basically to try and survive and provide their own food to find a water source, things like that. Because of this, everyone's focused on survival. So artists, teachers, lawyers are going to completely disappear because no one really is going to have the time to learn that because they're more concerned with putting food in their belly and it makes sure their family doesn't starve to death. Because of this, knowledge is no longer passed down, okay, at all. And you're going to kind of see a lot of that Greek and Roman knowledge be kind of lost for during this period until it's rediscovered in the Renaissance. And also, you're not going to see as many improvements. There's a time where we see less advancements and less inventions. So, what is the effect on Europe and its people? Okay, Europe's going to break into a bunch of small kingdoms with their own laws and leaders constantly fighting for power. So they're no longer going to be working together; they're just fighting for power. The number one goal of an individual is basically survival. And I'm going to get more into why that's so important and kind of how your life might be as a normal Europe, if you lived in Europe during this time. One of the big things is the decline of cities. Okay, Rome is known for having these great cities with this incredible artwork, architecture. Okay, they had basically, like almost like universities, places of learning things like that. When cities decline, we usually see a decline in the education of the population. Usually, we also see a decline in the economy, things like that, because cities can only survive if there's enough food to send into the city. If there's people trading, okay, if and when you the city decline, you don't have these people working together to study and find new things. You're going to see trade routes break down. So now people, once again, they're depend on their own food, their own goods. And the Roman Empire, you could live in, say, modern day France and get something from the Middle East or North Africa. Okay, that's how big these trade routes are. No more. There's no common currency, which means back to the barter system. Okay, barter system is, for instance, like if you're at lunch and someone says, "Hey, I'll give you this pizza for two things of fries." Okay, that's a barter system. All right. The problem with the barter system is there's no common currency throughout all of Europe. So now, if you go from one part of Europe to another, you're not going to be able to trade easily because you can't say, "Hey, that's worth $10." It's no longer worth money. Then the Roman knowledge, culture, law, technology is almost all forgotten for this period of time, just because it's not really useful to them at the moment. All right. So when we look at this map, I think this visual way is kind of easy to understand. This is top one in the top left. Now this is in 117 AD. That's Rome as an extent, its biggest period. Okay, so during that time, Roman Empire is controlling everything. They're working together. Everyone is more or less united. What's going to happen here is when Rome splits up, you can see how each kingdom is now separated, and each kingdom wants to be the most powerful one. So now instead of all working to try and better everyone, they're going to basically solely be concerned with bettering themselves, which means fighting wars against each other nonstop. And as they're fighting wars against each other nonstop, you have people dying. They cost money. Okay, it takes up more food and stuff, so it's hard to sustain a population. And once again, we kind of go into this darker period of human history. All right, daily life for the peasants. Um, so majority of the population become peasant farmers. Basically, they're going to farm on little patches of soil. Okay, a lot of times they would have one farm for they'd have pretty much two areas they would grow. All right, one set of crops for this year, and then the next area they would plant elsewhere to let that place basically get nutrients again. So you were the lowest rung in the social ladder. And this is the majority of the people. Everyone likes to think about the knights and the lords, the kings, and the ladies, and all those things, but most likely you're going to be a peasant. So you had to pay taxes to the local lord in the form of crops you grew. And after you did this, you basically just had to hope that you had enough crops not to starve after this. So it doesn't matter if you had a bad harvest, if say the winter was long, you didn't grow as many crops. Your lord, okay, who the lord basically you were farming was on his land, okay, he would take what he wanted and then leave you with whatever. Didn't matter. He didn't care about your family. Okay, so let's say you ended up with enough food. You had to hope then that basically some that your land wouldn't be burned and your family murdered by the enemies of your lord, okay, because they were constantly fighting. So let's say you save enough food, then you have to hope it doesn't get stolen and your family doesn't get murdered. Now once this is all done and hopefully you've survived this part, after harvesting you would be called up to go fight in the army under your local lord. You weren't really trained and you also weren't given equipment. You would pretty much bring whatever it was you used on the farm. So all food was boiled, and you rarely got to eat any meat because the animals usually belonged to the lords and the nobility. You would just eat like boiled vegetables and anything else you could find. Overall, life's been pretty miserable for you. It's a wake up, it's a struggle every day, and you pretty much lived in fear. Okay, so it's not a time that's envious to say be alive. So during this time, we're going to see the rise of the Catholic Church, okay? Because the Roman Empire is gone, and there's no one to really unify Europe, and the Catholic Church is going to fill this void. The reason they're able to fill this void is because, first of all, they offer help for the poor. The Catholic Church will also become the only place where you can get an education. Now that's going to be a church education. They have these big cathedrals they're going to build, and around those, okay, they would have entertainment, things like that, and also salvation. And what we mean by that is pretty much they would offer the chance for you to go to heaven after your life, and we'll get into a little more why that's important in a second. So, church influence, okay, the church was able to then maintain this influence, okay, because if the church commanded something, whether it was to give money or go to war, you did it. because if you disobeyed them, they would threaten you and say you're not going to heaven. Okay, and you also had to follow. They were also the only consistent set of laws throughout Europe. So why were you so concerned with going to heaven? Well, one, because you didn't want to go somewhere bad. In your belief, you didn't want to go somewhere bad for the rest of your life. But more importantly, okay, think about this. Their lives were so miserable that really the big thing they had to look forward to almost was dying and going to heaven. So for them, they're like, all right, if we get through our lives and we put our heads down, we work and listen and do what we're told. At least, we'll go to their paradise for the rest of their life. So that's why one of the reasons the church is able to have such influence and then maintain the influence. Um, Now, the church didn't just have control over the peasants; they were actually able to control kings and nobility. And the way they did this is something called the divine right of kings. And it's a really important concept we're gonna have to understand. Okay, um, pretty much this. Okay, the kings were chosen by God, but it was the church that would decide pretty much who was chosen by God. So if the church were to say that you were chosen by God, you're the king, now the peasants have to listen to you. All right. Because if the peasants don't listen to you, that means that you are not listening to God, basically. Therefore, they're committing a sin. Remember, peasants don't want to do that because all they're looking forward to is going to heaven. Now, how does the church maintain influence over kings and stuff? Because if the king disobeyed the church leaders might proclaim that, hey, God no longer favors you. They chose someone else to be king, and then you would lose all your power. And they might even say, hey, if you do listen to this guy, you're committing a sin. So that's basically how the church kept power also over kings. Is basically they would say, hey, if this king's listening to the church, God chose him. If he's not listening to the church, God wants someone else to be king, and the peasants were going to listen to the church. Okay, and that's how they were able to keep a lot of power. So this is a quick little introduction into the beginning of the Middle Ages. I want you to understand that there really was society really broke down. But now you're going to see new people feel the power of what. Okay, the Catholic Church is going to rise in the power, and we're going to see a new type of lifestyle emerge. All right. So remember, make sure you fill out your study guide and then you turn that in so that you can get full credit. And if you do have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email or anything, okay? And I will let you know.